Hi, everybody. Well, I think we're going to get started. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Thanks for coming. We're recording this for later online viewing, so I'm going to ask that people hold questions until the very end of the talk so we can make sure that we finish by 1 o'clock, and then I can stick around afterwards for more questions. Good. So about once a decade or two, a major city on the West Coast experiences an earthquake that's strong enough to cause substantial damage and injury. And typically about 50 people have died in some of these larger events. And maybe once a lifetime, we have the big earthquakes like the great San Francisco earthquake of 1906. And yet we're all still here, right? We want to live in the Bay Area. The good news is that we can, because there are precautions that we can take that can really drastically reduce the chances that an earthquake will create problems for us. There's a problem, though. We know we're supposed to be taking precautions, but as you can see, for a number of reasons, people don't take them, and they're basically asking for trouble. So I'm Matt Springer. I'm on the faculty in the cardiology division here, and I should say right off that earthquakes are not my official area of research at UCSF. The reason that I give these talks is because I have experienced or been otherwise impacted by the last 3 most destructive quakes in California, 1971, 89, and 94. And so I've become very familiar with both the kinds of problems that can occur and the precautions that we can take now. And these are things you can do at home and at work that could really make a difference between an earthquake being a negative event in your life and just being something that's fun to talk about years later, like today. So I'm going to tell you a bit about what I've experienced in some of these earthquakes, so you know what to expect. We'll talk about what to do during an earthquake and spend the rest of the time talking about the precautions. So I want to start with the state of California. And I think that you all recognize California here, even though the state lines aren't drawn in this picture, because we have a number of unique and recognizable features, right? We've got the bay, the Central Valley, the hills. But what's important to realize is that these unique and recognizable features are caused by seismic activity. We've got earthquake faults, giant cracks in the ground running up and down the state. And if you actually take a look from above closely, you can see these cracks. So take a look at this. There's a crack running through the ground, and there's another big crack, and there, and there. And if you take a close look at the Bay Area, you can actually see that we essentially owe our existence, our form, to these 3 major fault systems that you read about in the newspaper, the San Andreas, Hayward, and Calaveras faults, and their North Bay cousins. So watch what happens when I take away these lines. Look at the East Bay. The East Bay is basically defined by those 2 fault systems. But what I think is really impressive is that a lot of what we know in the North Bay and the peninsula are actually parts of the San Andreas Fault. So if you're up here, the Tamales Bay that separates Point Reyes from everything else, that's the San Andreas Fault. And if you're driving on Highway 280 and you see the Crystal Springs Reservoir, those lakes down there, that's the San Andreas Fault. And as a matter of fact, you know, I had already started giving these talks, and I was flying out of the airport a few years ago to go to a conference. And I looked out the window just in time to see this picture, so I snapped an image. This is the Highway 280. We're heading towards the ocean. We've just left the airport. That's the Crystal Springs Reservoir and the associated lakes. And 2 things occurred to me as I was looking at this scene. First of all, wow, there really is a giant water-filled crack running up and down the peninsula. That's pretty impressive. And the other thing that occurred to me was, did they really need to put a neighborhood right there? It's kind of unfortunate, but I think that pictures like this remind us that we live with the effects of earthquakes every day in the Bay Area. So my first experience with a decently large quake, and you know, I've never been through the big one, none of us have been through the big one, but my first experience with a decently large quake was the 1971 Somar quake down in LA. This was a 6.6 on the Richter scale. And for your context, there's Los Angeles, for those of you who don't know. That's the San Fernando Valley. I grew up in the sleepy suburb of Northridge, which at the time few people had heard of, and that was going to change. That's the epicenter of the quake. And in 1971, I looked about like this. Presumably you can tell which of the people is me in the photo. And I showed this picture not just to show that I was doing microscopy before any of you, but I show it so that you won't think poorly of me when I tell you that in 1971 I was afraid of the dark, but not if I was in my bed. Then it was okay. And so I had this routine worked out. If I had to get up in the middle of the night, I would turn the light off, I would run through the dark room, and I would dive into my bed and land, and the bed would bounce up and down a couple of times. And the amazing coincidence, the timing was perfect. This morning, I dove into bed, the bed bounced up and down, and it didn't stop. It just kept going. So I have this little kid trying to figure out why the bed hasn't stopped. And my mom came and said, hey, we've got to get under the table. We're having an earthquake. Long story short, my family waited it out. We got under the kitchen table, and we did okay. A couple of things fell off of shelves, and we had some cracks in the patio. Other than that, we were fine. Now, later that evening, our entire part of the San Fernando Valley was told to evacuate because there was concern that a nearby dam had sustained some structural damage, and they wanted to make sure that no one was there while they checked it to make sure it wasn't going to break. It was fine. We got the all clear. We came back, I think, the next day after spending the night at our cousin's place. No problem for us. Now, not everybody was that fortunate. There were 65 people killed in this earthquake. Can everyone on this side see? Yeah. And I've got some pictures of damage from this earthquake. For example, a freeway interchange north of the San Fernando Valley that collapsed. They rebuilt it bigger and stronger than before. And this picture is of key importance to everyone here at UCSF. This is a hospital near the epicenter of the quake. This is one wing of the building, and it's fallen over. And it was this event that's responsible for these constantly evolving series of seismic standards that are still affecting us today, seismic standards for hospitals. This is why we have the new hospital going up in Mission Bay, new hospital at SFGH, new hospital at the VA, construction here at the Parnassus Medical Center. It's because of this event. Now, in 1989, we had our own quake, the Loma Prieta quake. It was a 6.9 on the Richter scale. And we tend to think of this as a San Francisco earthquake, but actually it was a Santa Cruz earthquake. There's the epicenter. That's Santa Cruz right there. So in 1989, well, there's me, grad student at Stanford at the time, and you see this picture so you see how far away I was from the epicenter. And any of you who were already in San Francisco at the time, you were even further away. But, you know, we all got really shaken up by this quake. It was a very wide area. And this was a very surreal experience for me because it was the afternoon, and I was outside on campus. I was walking across campus. There was no wind, and yet suddenly the leaves of the trees started rustling. And then the clock tower bells started chiming. And then the ground under my feet started moving. So you could actually watch the progression across. And the entire time, the only sound were the bells and the leaves. It was not a Hollywood, sound effect going on. Very amazing. And this quake is also notable because it was on national television. As I'm sure some of you remember, Game 3 of the World Series had just gotten underway at Candlestick Park. In fact, it was the Giants versus the A's. Basically, the whole country was watching our earthquake. Thought California was falling into the ocean. Wasn't that bad, but we did have problems. A number of buildings at Stanford were closed for years. We had 62 people killed, several thousand people injured in this quake. And I've got some more pictures of damage. I told you this was a Santa Cruz earthquake, so that's downtown Santa Cruz. Very famous picture here, the Cypress structure, the double-decker freeway in Oakland. Top part collapsed in on the bottom. They've since replaced it by a single-story structure in a slightly different place. But notably, the majority of the fatalities in this earthquake occurred right here, including a UCSF van pool of employees on the way home. A number of you have seen this picture recently, eastern span of the Bay Bridge. The top part collapsed on the bottom part. They retrofitted the western span. They determined it was cheaper to build a new eastern bridge than to retrofit that, and that's why 24 years later, just like a few months ago, we got our new Eastern Bay Bridge. And they're now taking the old one down. I don't know if you've seen it. It's pretty impressive. The middle part is missing. It's really stunning. I'm sure you've seen pictures like this. This is the Marina District in San Francisco. The marina is built on landfill. Did very poorly, and I'll talk about that again in a few minutes. Now, in 1994, everyone heard about my hometown, Northridge. I was not there for this earthquake. I had already moved away, but I know this earthquake very well. My mother actually lost her apartment and everything she owned in that earthquake, and a neighbor had to come in and kick down her door to get her out of the apartment. My father spent days cleaning up his apartment from the damage, and I saw a lot of the areas where I grew up on TV and in the newspaper in various states of problem. And so I know this earthquake very, very well. Now, in this earthquake, there were 51 people killed, several thousand people injured. This was a 6.7 on the Richter scale. And are these numbers starting to seem familiar to you? I keep showing you the same magnitude, the same number of fatalities. And I think that what's going on here is that these are the earthquakes that are large enough to cause substantial damage and injury and some fatalities, bigger than the Napa quake that we had last week. But they're small enough that they occur with regularity. Those 1906 earthquakes, they don't happen very often. but these things do. And I think that's one of the bottom lines that I want you to get out of this talk, that I cannot guarantee you, I don't know if we're going to have another 1906 earthquake in our lifetime. But you can bet your bottom dollar we're going to keep experiencing things like this, or even the Napa quake caused some problems. And so you really need to prepare for these kinds of quakes. That's the bottom line. Now this quake, well, I told you about the interchange, the freeway interchange that fell down in 1971. It actually collapsed again in this earthquake. So what can we say? We continue to learn, right, as we go. This is a picture of the Bullock's department store at the Northridge Fashion Center. It's a shopping mall where I used to hang out as a kid on Saturday afternoons. And this really surprised people. This was at Cal State Northridge. That was a parking structure. And it was a surprise because this was not an old building. They had just put this in a year or two before the earthquake. And they thought it was good enough, but apparently it wasn't. What was really notable for my own family, however, is this picture. I told you that my mother lost her apartment in this earthquake, but we think that she was very fortunate because when she moved into that apartment, she chose it over this one, the Northridge Meadows, which used to be the same height as its neighbor. Okay, that's the third floor. That's the second floor. It's all collapsed in on the first floor. And the first floor was a parking garage. And it's these so-called soft story construction buildings where the first floor is a parking structure or a store, something without as much shear stability. These buildings are especially vulnerable in earthquakes. And of course, at this point, the math is going on in your heads. You're thinking, well, aren't most of the buildings in San Francisco like this? And the answer is yes, we have a special problem in this city. So they've recently made it mandatory for building owners of I think, with more than 5 units or something like that, if they were built before the early 70s, that they have to be retrofitted, and it's really worthwhile. So we'll touch upon that at the very end of the talk. Now, I don't want to freak you out too much. The last thing I want is for you to all run home and book you're moving back to the East Coast of the Midwest, where, by the way, they have earthquakes too. But basically, if you are not scared of earthquakes at all, I would like to scare you a little bit, okay? But if you are afraid of earthquakes, I want to reassure you, because most of the problems that people have experienced in these quakes are preventable. And in fact, these pictures that I've been showing you, most of the damage didn't look like that. I'm showing you the extreme examples, right? They look more impressive. But most of the damage in these quakes were things falling over, things falling down, things flying through the air, like what we saw a lot of in the Napa quake last week. And these are the things that you can prevent against. I do want to add, though, for legal reasons, if for none other, that the precautions that we're going to talk about are not foolproof. So they are a really good idea. They will drastically reduce the chances of an earthquake causing problems for you, but they will not guarantee that you won't have a problem. And I think you can see why I need to say that. Okay. So bottom line here is that quakes happen. They always have and they always will, and we need to be comfortable with living with them. So what you've seen so far, we had the 1971 quake down south, 1989 up here, 1994 down south. Seattle in 2001 had their own quake. It was a similar story. And for context, the Great San Francisco earthquake of 1906 is thought to have been about an 8. And the Richter scale is a log scale, so you go up one number, it's 10 times worse. For further context, for those of you who have lived in the Bay Area for the last several years, you know that we've experienced a lot of these little baby quakes that you just feel a little. And I've been dutifully adding them to this slide as they occur. These aren't all of the quakes that have occurred, but they're all of the quakes that we felt in San Francisco, to my knowledge. And I'm running it to the middle of 2011. We're going to pause it there because this is really interesting to see what's been happening. Notice these quakes are forming a line, and those quakes are forming a line. Isn't that interesting? And if you were here in the beginning of the talk, you'll recognize those lines because this is the San Andreas Fault, and that is the Calaveras Fault. And notably absent is anything on the Hayward Fault at this point, but in the middle of 2011, we had this big cluster of these little quakes all centered on the Hayward Fault. And I'm basically going to stop keeping track on this map because it's getting too difficult to make any sense of it. But I did add the Napa quake because it was a sizable quake, so I felt I should add that. Now, for further context, several years ago in 2010, we had a massive quake in Chile at a 8.8, and that is actually tied for the 8th largest quake ever recorded. The Japan quake that occurred in 2011 is in a 4-way tie for the 4th largest quake ever recorded at a 9.0. And the Indonesia quake in 2004 with the killer tsunami, that's the 3rd largest recorded at a 9.1. So we've had a lot of these things on the planet over the last decade. I'm not trying to be alarmist, I'm just pointing it out. And if you're curious, the largest quake ever recorded, Chile actually has that distinction too, 9.5. I've heard that the planet can't make quakes much bigger than that. But this gets us to something that I think is an important point. Especially since the Japan quake, a lot of people have been especially worried. They've seen the massive problems that can occur, and they say, well, that could happen here. And the answer is, well, yes and no. These huge, massive planetary scale quakes occur at subduction zones, where one plate is literally diving beneath another. That's what causes these massive quakes. In the Bay Area, we have a different situation. We have one plate sliding against another, and what the geologists say, and I'm not going to guarantee this, but what the geologists say is that the largest quake we expect to see in the Bay Area is about an 8. So San Francisco, 1906. Small consolation. You know, that was still a pretty big earthquake. But these massive quakes that rip 400 miles of the Earth's crust theoretically are not going to happen in the Bay Area. Okay, so I want to say a few words about where you are in an earthquake, because the soil you're on makes a big difference. So this is a liquefaction map, and you can download maps like this, or you can access them for any city in the Bay Area by going to the Association of Bay Area Governments website. And basically, they're simulations showing how much the ground will temporarily act as a liquid and lose its structural integrity. So the red areas are the worst, yellow is the next bad, blue and green are the best in terms of this liquefaction potential. This is a good map. I like this one a bit better. It's done in a different way. It's not as useful for the western half of the city because they don't show the liquefaction there. But the eastern half looks a lot like what I just showed you, and I like it because you can see down to the intersection where you are. And if you're curious why there's this very odd shape to this green zone, all you have to do is look at what San Francisco looked like before we started filling in the bay, and you see a remarkable similarity. So I told you that the marina is built on landfill, right? Well, that's the marina then, that's the marina now. And the irony of the situation is that the marina was actually filled in for a 1915 Pan-Pacific Exposition to celebrate San Francisco's recovery from the 1906 earthquake. And it didn't get tested until the 89 quake, and it didn't do very well. Right? So Mission Bay, you know, a lot of people know the Mission Bay campus, and you ever wonder why it has the strange name of Mission Bay if it's land? Because when they named it, it was still a bay. That's Mission Bay, okay? So UCSF campus is right around there. The new hospital actually touches on this real land here. Giants Ballpark is here, okay? The channel that is behind Berry Street that comes from McCovey Cove, that is all that's left of Mission Bay. That, you know, hooks up to the bay. And we're going to talk more about this in a minute, Mission Bay specifically. But I did want to point out that this whole area is landfill. And landfill is basically whatever they use to fill in the land, including boats. There are boats underneath the financial district. I can also give you a real-world example of ground rearrangement. This is kind of cool. I went back to Northridge in 1995, the year after the quake, and I was really curious to know how my old house had done, where I had grown up as a kid. So I introduced myself to the guy there. He said it was the best house in the neighborhood for damage, so that's great. But what was really interesting was that he said he had just tilled up the backyard to put in a new lawn before the earthquake. So before the quake, it was chunky soil. And he said after the quake, it was smooth and all the pebbles had risen to the top. So that gives you an idea of what you're dealing with. Okay, I'm sure you can't read this from where you're sitting, but this says Great Sand Bank. Okay. The entire western half of the city, essentially, is sand dune. And so even though it doesn't really reflect it in this map, if you are out in the western part of the city, you have to be concerned about the shifting sands. And we'll get back to that in a minute. First, I want to deal with Mission Bay, and I don't just show this for UCSF audiences. Everyone is always wondering, well, given what happened in the Marina District, are we being stupid by putting all this investment into Mission Bay? I mean, we're building condos and apartments, university, hospital, ballpark, arena. You know, are we being stupid? Well, I actually live in Mission Bay, lived there for a few years. I clearly think that it's okay. And the good news is that they're much better at building on landfill than they used to be. So if you walk around Mission Bay when they're getting ready to build a new building, you hear this obnoxious, constant pow, 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 right? I'm sure most of you know that sound. And that is the sound of these 50 to 70 foot tall steel piles being hammered down into the ground before the building goes up. I took this picture at 5th and Berry before they built an apartment complex there. They hammer these things down all the way. then they weld another one onto the top, and they keep on going, cycle after cycle, until they hit bedrock or point of refusal. Sometimes as much as 200 feet down in a lot of Mission Bay, and some of the newer construction projects there went down 260 feet to the bedrock. And not just a few of these things, whole forests of them. So you can picture these buildings that are on hundreds of these piles at Mission Bay campus and also up in the community. Think of them as the tips of skyscrapers that are mostly submerged, that are on solid ground. Now, they don't do this to the streets. So if you walk around Mission Bay south of the channel, we're starting to see this sort of thing, like the Strata Apartments and here at the UCSF campus. Basically, the streets and the sidewalks are sinking, and the buildings aren't. So they've actually turned this now. This was taken half a year ago. They've now turned this into a step, and they've put a ramp to get to the entrance to the building. So we've got the ground is sinking, the sea level is rising, but that's another talk. Okay, what about out here, Sunset District? We're on bedrock where I'm giving this talk, but if you look out the window, you look across sand dunes. And this is what the Sunset District really is. And I really like this picture. This is looking from Golden Gate Heights, 15th and Ortega, out towards the ocean. And this is actually 19th Avenue. It's already there. Yep. That's Golden Gate Park. It was there already. And this whole region, this whole sandbox, is going to turn into the Sunset and Parkside districts. And this whole area up here is going to turn into the Richmond district. Now, sand is stronger than landfill, but the buildings that are out there are older, and they're not necessarily built according to any kind of code, right? So if you live out here, or if you have buildings there, if they were built before the early 70s, you really need to remember the shifting sand underneath them and determine if they need to be retrofitted. And again, we'll touch on that at the very end of the talk. Okay, so I want to say a little bit about what to do during a large quake, because there's some very dangerous myths that are floating around. During a big quake, and I mean a really big quake, you've already decided, hey, this is a major thing. What are you doing? Better yet, where are you? Well, I'll tell you where you are not. You are not running out of the building. And this is hard because there's millions of years of evolution in your head telling you, run out of the building, right? But the fact is that in industrialized nations, at least, most of the injuries occur when people are running from inside a building to outside a building. And they're running through the danger zone outside the building where bricks and window glass and things like that are falling. And I've got this video that I downloaded from CNN after the New Zealand Christchurch quake. I love it. It shows people running out of the building, and it also shows what's going on outside the building. And you might recall after this quake, we kept seeing these pictures of completely collapsed buildings. But you know what? They were all the same 4 buildings that you saw over and over again. Most of the damage in Christchurch looked like this. And a lot of people died and were injured in scenes like this. And here's a picture from the Napa quake last week. Okay? You don't want to be running into this stuff. If you're in a safe place indoors, you should stay there. Now, this next one is going to surprise people, okay? Especially if you're my age or older, and especially if you're from Southern California, because you are not standing in a doorway. Okay? And they used to teach us to brace yourself in a doorway, right? That's actually based on a myth, and it's all Southern California's fault. I take responsibility for it. In the olden days, these structures down there were adobe. It's basically clay with wooden door frames. This is my stylized version here. And in the big quakes that would occur, the adobe would turn into rubble. And all that would be left were the door frames. That's where this comes from. But you know what? In a modern building, the door frame is no stronger than the rest of the building. And if you're there in the doorway and there's a door, it can slam shut. It can pitch you out to where you don't want to be. It can crush your fingers. You're just not supposed to do that. So what I'm going to tell you is amazing common sense. Okay? You are under something sturdy, a sturdy table, a sturdy desk. And here's your first precaution, because you can look around where you live, where you work, and you can say, well, what would I get under? You don't have to leave that decision to the last minute. What's stable, what's not near a window, hopefully, right? And especially at work, how many of my coworkers do I need to fight off to be the winner to get into that one table in the room? But this is an important concept, regardless of some myths that you may have heard about, which I'll touch upon in a minute. More recently, they've been saying that if you are in your bed during a quake, assuming that your bedroom is set up correctly, and we'll talk about that in a minute, if you're already in your bed, it can be safest just to stay there. Cover your head with a pillow. Because apparently, a lot of people have gotten injured in quakes when they get out of their bed and they're trying to get to the safe spot, right? They're going through unsafe area, and a lot of injuries occur. So this is what they're saying now. Cover your head with a pillow. Now, I get a lot of people asking me about this email that's been going around for years, the so-called triangle of life concept. This is a very compelling sounding email, and it's from a guy who says, well, I'm an expert on this, and anyone who ever gets under something gets crushed when the ceiling comes down in one giant piece, and that instead you should get next to something so that when the ceiling comes down in one giant piece, it'll hit the thing you're next to, and it'll miss you. You'll be in this safe spot. It's important to realize that all of the mainstream emergency organizations flatly reject this concept. Okay? The Red Cross says it will cost lives, it will cause injuries. I think this is a self-explanatory picture from Coalinga after the earthquake they had there in the 80s. And these organizations have put together a website that rebuts this email point by point. It's based on misconceptions, and some of the statements are false in the email. And in my own website, I have a summary of that points to their website. The Red Cross asks that if you get this email, you group reply back and you say, no, this is not right. I don't have time really to go into it in more detail in this talk, but I do want to take the opportunity to tell you about a blog that I started writing a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, I guess. It's quaketips.blogspot.com. I have no financial interest in any of this. This is an informational resource that I use to elaborate on some of the things that I talk about here and to do special interest articles. And it's become a useful informational resource for people. Huge spike in page views after the Napa quake. It was really kind of fun to watch. But basically, it's a frequently asked questions. The questions that a lot of people ask end up being dealt with in great detail here, looking at different kinds of products, discussing philosophical aspects. You can get sort of an idea of what I've got here. And so I strongly urge you to check out this blog, either follow it or subscribe to it. And again, I get nothing out of it. But it's nice to know that if I'm putting these things up, that people will actually see them. So enough of that. You can find that later. I want to say a little bit about what to do after a quake, because there are some controversies. You may have heard you're supposed to turn off your gas. You may have heard you're not supposed to turn off your gas unless you sense a leak. The official word from the utilities companies up and down the state is that if you smell gas, if you hear hissing, if you see your gas meter dials going like this, turn off the gas. But if you don't suspect a leak, they don't want you to turn off the gas. And the reason for that is because they want you, if you turn off your gas, they don't want you to turn it back on. This is a controversial point, and I'm not going to get into it in detail here. Again, you can go to the blog and you can see an article that I spent 4 months researching for about this topic, and you can see how complicated this issue is. But they say, if you turn it off, don't turn it back on. And after they want to do it. They'll come out and do it. After the Loma Prieta quake, they tried to tell people not to turn off their gas. But 80% of PG&E customers turned off their gas. And it took PG&E, armed with their, like contractors to bolster their ranks, 3 weeks to get around the metropolitan area and get everyone's gas back on. So if you don't need to turn off the gas, don't do it. If you do need to turn off the gas, know how. Have a gas wrench there. Know where your gas shutoff valve is. And if you're in a single-family home or a small apartment complex, if you can find your gas meter, you'll usually see a pipe with a knob on it. This line is going parallel to the pipe. That means the gas is on. And if you were to turn that at a 90-degree angle, it looks like it's turning off the gas, right? That's when the gas is off. And here's actually another precaution, something you should check in the next couple of days. Find this, go to it, take a wrench, and try turning this a little bit. Don't turn it off, okay? Just turn it maybe 1/8 of a turn. I'm willing to bet that a full half of you won't be able to move it, because these things freeze in position because of the elements. If that's the case, don't force it. Just call PG&E, and they'll come out pretty promptly, and they'll free it up for you for free. If you need to turn off your gas and you can't, that's a bad thing. Okay, so I strongly recommend this. Okay, so let's get on to the precautions that I think most of you want to hear about. I think that a lot of us have probably had a similar conversation with people. You're talking with your friends on the East Coast, Midwest, wherever, and the conversation goes something like this. They say, how can you live in that place with earthquakes? And you say, well, how can you live in that place with hurricanes and tornadoes and fires and floods and killer storms and all these other things? And they come back at you with, well, at least we have warning. And with that, they win the argument. And you walk away feeling kind of silly, right? That's happened to some of you, right? Well, I'm here to tell you that we do have advance warning about earthquakes. We just have it much farther in advance than all those other disasters. So there's going to be an earthquake, do something about it. There, you've been warned. Okay? And as an aside, I should mention that a week and a half ago, I said that exact thing at the Mission Bay Library. I said, there's going to be an earthquake. And 13 hours later, there was. So be careful tonight. The problem is that there's so many things you can do to prepare, and people see these long lists, and they get overwhelmed. And they say, I'll figure it out one of these days. And of course, they never do. Right? That's a problem. What's important to realize, though, is that some of these precautions are much more important than others. And some of these precautions are much cheaper and easier than others. So I've broken them down into categories from you've got no excuse not to do some of these things if you live in an earthquake zone, down to, okay, you've done everything else, what else can you do? So let's start with the first category. I think maybe the most important thing I can tell you today is what not to put over the head of your bed. In the 1971 quake, I have a relative younger than me. She had a thing where she would get up in the middle of the night and go into the hallway and curl up outside her parents' door and sleep. And they had heavy frame pictures in their hallway. And during the Silmar quake, 71, those pictures did what pictures tend to do in quakes. They jumped off of their hooks and came crashing down. One of them missed her head by that much. So there was no harm done, but you can see the tragedy that was narrowly avoided. And if you consider that you've got your head right there, 1/3 of your life, okay, we're UCSF audience, maybe 1/5 of your life. Who are we kidding? But when it's there, it's asleep, and it doesn't see what's coming. So you just don't want to put your head in that position. So in our old apartment, it looked like this. We had a tapestry. In our current place, it's just a blank wall. We never got around to putting anything up. The other thing is that you want to keep your bed away from windows. And it's not that you're worried that you're going to go sailing out the window, but if the glass were to shatter, you would be pelted with broken glass. You'd roll over into broken glass. You'd get out of bed into broken glass. And some people will tie a bag of shoes to the bedpost so that they can walk safely. But you know, if you're going to have to roll over through broken glass to get to them, that's still not great. And so you just want to keep it away. And you know what? There's an actual earthquake emergency preparedness brochure from a reputable company, organization, who shall remain nameless, that says, and I quote, keep your bed at least 10 feet away from the nearest window. And I got to wonder what city these people are in where they write something like that. But you know, you see the concept, right? It's not going to be the most convenient setup for your room. And this is not going to be the most Martha Stewart approved decor, right? But this is the kind of compromise that you make when you live in an area with earthquakes. Simple as that. Okay, what about emergency kits? This is not earthquake specific. This is anywhere that you live subject to natural or human-made disasters. You were supposed to be self-sufficient for, they used to say 72 hours, remember that? And then after Hurricane Katrina, they upgraded that to 7 days. And now the Red Cross has been starting to talk about 2 weeks. You know, it's whatever you can actually do. But the point is, you're supposed to be self-sufficient. And you should have a portable kit in case you need to go to a shelter or something like that. This is our portable kit. Pardon me. So this, years ago, was a small backpack, like the kind that you buy pre-made in the hardware stores. And over the years, as I saw what happened to people in different disasters, I thought about, well, what would we really want to have with us if we needed to go to a shelter? Our portable kit has grown. And this is no longer something I'm going to carry. It's got wheels and a telescopic handle like carry-on luggage. We'll wheel it out of there. So that's the portable kit. We've got some food and supplies in there. And then we have more food and supplies in the closet. And the most likely scenario, by the way, is not that you'll have to evacuate. The most likely scenario is you'll be at home living comfortably, but all the stores are closed for a while. So just have things you need. So let's talk about this. What about food? A lot of people have canned food. Canned food has a remarkably short shelf life. It's 2 or 3 years to their expiration date. I really like these MREs, Meals Ready to Eat is what it stands for. These are military rations, but they're also used for emergency relief. And you can get them from non-military websites. They come in a variety of menus, hundreds, different menus, macaroni and cheese, baked chicken, things like that. And they have a very long shelf life, depending on the temperature of your closet or wherever you're keeping them. And I want to mention, by the way, that there's been some questions in recent years about what the shelf life of MREs actually is. But the expiration date on a shelf life is not an expiration date. It's just the date by which it's no longer as ideal taste and texture. And if you go to my blog, I hope you do, you'll see a series of articles that I wrote about the expiration dates of MREs, including my experience eating a 14-year-old MRE. And I'm still here to tell you about it, right? So, and if you open one of these up when they're new, they're like Moffat cafeteria food. Good hospital cafeteria food. I like the food in Moffat hospital cafeteria. If you open one up at the end of its advertised lifespan. It's more like, if you're happy opening up a can of Chef Boyardee ravioli and eating it, you'll be fine. It's really not that bad. So these are very good, and they have a chemical packet that you put some water into it, and it heats up, so you can actually heat up your food even if you don't have electricity. It's very nice. There are also a variety of products like this that are basically fat and calories on a bar. You can shove them in your office at work. You can have them in your car. You can supplement your home supplies with them, so they're nice too. Now water, this is a real problem, especially for people in small places in the city, because the official recommendation is 1 gallon of water per person per day for up to 7 days. I mean, even if you're a couple, that's 14 gallons of water. What are you going to do? Well, we have in the past, other places we've lived, we had in a parking structure some kind of storage locker. And we would put most of the water down there and have a couple of gallons in the apartment just in case we were stuck in the apartment. In our current home, we don't have any storage outside the walls of the unit. And so in a closet, I put some shelves in the back, and we've got all the water there. But this illustrates something. Use a shelf solution. If you stack these jugs on top of each other, the bottom one can start to develop cracks. And all it takes is one little crack, and you've got water everywhere. This is a real thing. I've seen it happen. So always try to have them in shelves, have them bagged, if you do this gallon jug solution. One of the kinds of interesting things you can find out by going to my blog is you'll see an article I wrote about bottled water where I discovered that the FDA has said that you can ignore the expiration dates on these water jugs from the store. As long as they're commercially bottled and unopened, just ignore it. So the problem with this solution is every couple of years dumping it all down and lugging more up there. Put it in there, and then you can forget about it. That's the bottom line. So I always have to apologize ahead of time for this slide. It's remarkably dry and boring. It's just a list of things that we have in our kit. It's in the handout. For any of you who didn't get a handout, it's not critical. This is all online on my website. And it's just suggestions of things that you might think about. So we'll go through it as quickly as we possibly can. We've got food and water, can opener if you have cans, first aid kit, spare shirt and pants just in case you were not wearing what you wanted to wear during an earthquake when it hit. Work gloves in case you need to clean up some broken glass or something. This one is really important, cash. In an extended emergency, assume that the stores are closed, the banks are closed, the ATMs don't work, your credit cards don't work. You're limited to cash on hand and maybe even bartering, even when the store is open, right? Just cash. And so it's good to have cash in your kit, but I will add small bills. Because think of this, if you had $100 of 20s in your kit, and you needed to buy a battery, and someone could sell you a battery, but they didn't have any change, you would spend 20 bucks, 1/5 of your emergency cash on a battery. So have 5s, 1s, maybe even some coins. For the researchers in the audience, think aliquot, right? That's the whole point. It's just common sense. Emergency blankets in case you're going to be cold, radios and flashlights, get a good combo device as a backup that you can charge by cranking or shaking or things like that. Spare batteries for the battery-powered stuff. The light sticks are good, and these days they have battery-powered LED versions in the hardware stores for just a few bucks. Whistle, very important. For those of you who were here early enough in the talk, you know that my mother got stuck in her apartment after the Northridge quake, and a neighbor came and got her out of there, but only because she knew to come look for my mother, break down the door. If my mom had been stuck there and no one came for her, she would have needed to tell the outside world she was in there with no phone. So a whistle is very loud, and it's very small. So again, just common sense. Supplies that you can use to leave a note for people in case you had to go to a shelter, stuff like that. Rain ponchos, the kind that fold up. Think about the personal medications that you absolutely cannot do without. Because if you're cut off from your supply, you'd better figure out how to have extras in your emergency kit. And I know that in the case of some prescriptions, this can be hard to do, but just picture what you're going to do if suddenly you don't have any. You were just running out during the time of the quake, and you don't have any there. Spare eyeglasses, stuff for your pets. Out-of-town contact info is good because if you are unsuccessful in calling across town, frequently you can still call out of town, different lines. I didn't plan that. But that was good. That was very good. So having a contact ahead of time in, say, Southern California or a different part of the country is a wise thing to do. And I've tacked a few extra things here, knowing how to get in touch with your landlord, family emergency plans so you know how your family will reunite after the quake. I want to underscore this one. I wrote a blog article about this. Power failure backup lights are a great idea. I'm not talking about the flashlights that live in your outlet and are always charged. I'm talking about the ones that live in your outlet and are always off, unless the power cuts out or you unplug it, and then they turn on. So you will never wake up to a dark room in an emergency. Very wise thing to do. And last but not least, it's getting harder to justify these days, but a good old-fashioned corded phone with landline service, because in the event of an extended power outage, cordless phones won't work, your cell phones won't work after a while. Even if you can charge them again, there's no guarantee that the cell towers will be up. But in all but the absolute newest buildings, the phone jack from the phone company has its own power supply. So even if the lights are off, you can plug your phone into that and make a phone call. You need to have the landline service. And I know these things are becoming extinct, so I'm not sure what people are going to do in the next few years, but this is something to still consider. Okay, last in this category, I'll try to rush us through here. Bracing your water heater if you own a place. Don't make it look like this. This is a picture of the way it looked in our old apartment in the Sunset. Water heaters that looked like this fell down by the hundreds in the Northridge and Loma Prieta quakes. So they've stopped trying to tell you how to do it. U.S. Geological Survey says just go to your hardware store, tell them what you have, and they'll work with you to help you strap your water heater. Next category down, I told you about pictures jumping off of their hooks. Very common. I love these. They're called maze picture hooks. They're basically a piece of plastic that is a hook. Here it is from the side. Nail hole and bolt hole. And the picture wire goes through this zigzag hook. So if there was an earthquake and this picture were to start jumping around, the wire gets trapped in the maze and it doesn't come out. But it's surprisingly easy to put the picture up. You just grab the wire on both sides and thread it right on. You can feel your way down. And you can even take it off easily by unthreading it. But please don't use this as an excuse to hang a heavy frame picture over the head of your bed, because nothing is foolproof. Okay? Now, if you don't brace anything else in your homes, please look for these tall freestanding bookcases. They're top-heavy, not stable. They're notorious for falling over in earthquakes. Here's a picture from the Napa quake that was in all the newspapers, and I love it. You can actually see which direction the earthquake was going, because those are still up and these have all fallen down, right? But this is the sort of thing that you can guard against by bracing the bookcase at the top to the wall. And there are products that help you do this. Now, there is no official endorsement of any company or product by me or by UCSF, but the fact is these folks have 99% of the market for this product. So I have a picture of it here. These furniture straps come in different colors to match your wood, and they're basically very, very strong Velcro, where the fuzzy part permanently attaches to the top of your bookcase, and the hook part is a strap that you then bolt to the wall in various locations. So if you need to get behind it, say you drop something behind the bookcase, you can undo the Velcro and move it out of the way and then put it back. Now the caveat is you have to bolt these into wall studs. You cannot just bolt it into drywall. Doesn't matter what kind of anchor you use, okay? You can't do it. And I don't have time to tell you how to work with your wall studs, but there is a blog article that tells you all about working with wood studs, metal studs, how to find them, how to bolt into them. So you can go there. Now, earthquakes happen at labs too. So for those of you who are in the labs, if you've got freezers, incubators, hoods, things like that, you need to make sure that they are seismically braced as well. And you can actually get the facilities folks to come in and help you do this sort of thing. They either chain it to a rod on the back, or if there's no structural support behind it, they can actually drive bolts into the ground and put a strap over the top and cinch it down so that it can't fall over. So keep these in mind as well. At home and at work, if you have computer components, stereo components, things like that, that sit on top of surfaces, and especially if they're stacked, as some of them tend to be, they have different products that allow you to stick them down. This used to be what most people found, and I haven't seen these recently, these double buckle solutions. That seems that they've been replaced by something like this. One half is Velcro and one half is a buckle, or these double-sided Velcro blocks. You can see them close up right there. Multiple ways, and you can just determine what works best for you. The flat panel monitors, TVs and computer monitors, they're clearly an issue, right? Even if the base is heavy, they can still flop around. So this company recommends this kind of solution for both TVs and computer monitors. I agree with them halfway. I think it's a good solution for TVs because there's frequently a wall behind the TV. But for computer monitors, I don't think this is a good idea because it's not uncommon for the computer monitor to be in the middle of the room. So this isn't going to stop it from falling backwards. So here's what the U.S. Geological Survey suggests for computer monitors, using the same buckles and straps that I just showed you. Here's a picture from my own desk at home. You can see what I did. Good idea. And I've also done similar things in our lab. So we tried using the same product for our microscope. Honestly, don't know whether this is strong enough for the microscope. It's never been tested, but I figure it's better than nothing. Probably more importantly is what's on top of the equipment, what's hanging over it that could fall on the equipment. So the shelf above our microscope, we have all these controller boxes, and I use those buckles and straps to fasten them down to the shelf. Think about objects on shelves. It could take a big earthquake to make books fly off of a bookshelf, but it only takes a small earthquake, if done right, to set up vibrations that make objects walk. And if they walk far enough, they fall down. So here's a very simple solution. This is my desk at home. I've got picture wire between two screw eyes. Just pull the books up over the wire. Very simple to do. And since then, I discovered a nice product that I've used elsewhere in my home. It's basically a very high-class looking bungee cord that you cut to the desired length. You've got plastic pieces that crimp onto the sides, and then you can screw those plastic pieces to the bookcase. So this is really nice because it looks pretty decent. If I need to pull out one of those books, I just pull down the stretch cord and pull it out. But if there was an earthquake and all of these books started walking forward at the same time, they would be held in by the cord and they would not fall down. Now, we didn't used to worry about CDs. They're indestructible. But ever since having a small dog in our family, we've been concerned about sharp plastic corners raining down on the dog. And so, you know, we don't have nearly as many CDs on our shelves now as we did when I took this picture, but you get the idea. We have these straps in front of anything that could fall down and be a hazard for the dog. And so keep the little people in the family in mind, the two-legged and four-legged variety. And actually, I wrote an article in, I think, 2010 for the Cole Hardware newsletter that I have on my blog about extra precautions you can take if you have stay-at-home pets who are unattended during the day to make sure that they're safe in the aftermath of an earthquake before you get home. So you can go and check that out. All right, that next category down, we're making good time here. If you think about your kitchen cabinets, you might have very stiff latches. You might have magnets, whatever. But you know, if the quake is of the right sort, those doors will open. And especially with everything inside trying to push their way out, they'll swing open. So if you picture everything you've got behind those doors in a big pile of you know, broken glass and glop on your floor, this is what you're trying to avoid. And there were some great pictures after the Napa quake showing people's kitchens where every cabinet door was open. So some people will try to solve this by using the child-proof latches, the ones that let the door open by an inch and you slide your fingers behind them and move a lever, right? That works, but I like to cook. I'm in and out of these cabinets all the time, and I felt that that was too inconvenient for me. And so I really like these push latches. They are a claw and a peg. You can install them yourself. And here's a video that I took showing how they work. Basically, you can't open the thing by pulling it, but if you push first, it disengages, and you can open it. And then you close it, you push again, it re-engages, and now you can't open it. Very worthwhile. The reason that they're down in this category is because it's kind of a pain to install them correctly. And over the years, I've accumulated a lot of tips and tricks. And I did write a long blog article about this, explaining how to do this. It's by far the most viewed article in my blog. And I suspect that a company somewhere is officially directing people to the blog for instructions, because it's getting lots of page views per day. So what about earthquake insurance? You might have looked into it. You might have run away screaming. For full disclosure, I should say that my mother used to be an insurance agent. That has nothing to do with me talking about it here. But it is notable that after the Northridge quake, her earthquake insurance paid for several weeks in a hotel and all new possessions after the deductible. So high premium, high deductible. In a total catastrophe, you'll be happy you had it. In a mid-sized catastrophe, it might not help you because you might not reach the deductible. So you just have to decide for yourself. If you're interested in it, most of your insurance companies will carry the same policy from the California Earthquake Authority. So you can just ask your own insurance agent about it. Okay, last category down. If you've done all this other stuff, seriously consider sticking objects down to shelves if they're loose. And you can do this relatively easily with products like Quake Putty, which is under the legs of this guy. These things can turn into high-speed projectiles that fly from one side of the room to the other. That's the report from the Northridge quake. And there are a number of products that let you do this. I told you I wasn't going to endorse a product, but I feel I can unendorse a product because I've moved several times since starting to do a lot of these things. I don't recommend the museum wax. It's a holy terror to clean up afterwards. I like the putties. There are a number of them. They're essentially the same thing. And what you do is you take wads of them and you put them under the object. You push down and twist slightly back and forth, and it's fastened. If you want to remove the object, you just pull up and twist, and it comes right off. And the Quake putties, in most cases, they don't leave marks. There's a blog article about this too. They're reusable. They're very nice. The only problem is they're not clear. So if you're trying to stick down something clear, they look ridiculous. So there is this one product, Quake Gel, that is clear. This can only be used on non-porous surfaces. That's the limitation. If you use the Quake putty, something else you can do with it is you can stick down wine glasses. If you have expensive wine glasses in your kitchen cabinets, because you might have stopped those doors from opening, but you didn't stop the contents from falling and breaking. So I actually have my wine glasses stuck down like this. And if you want to use one of them, there's a motion you have to get kind of used to, but you grab it by the base, not the top, because you'll just break the stem, right? But grab it by the base, and it's a twist and a tilt, and it comes right off. And then you can peel off the Quake putty. You don't have to wash the glass because it doesn't leave any oil or anything like that. Drop the pieces of putty in the shelf because when you put the glass back, you'll reuse them. It's very nice. Okay, I said that towards the end of the talk I was going to touch on home retrofitting. I am not an expert in this. If you have a building that's older than the early 70s, you should definitely look to see whether it needs to be bolted to the foundation. You should see if it needs to have shear walls installed. This is not cheap and it's not easy, and the suggestion is that you go to your hardware store and ask them for a referral to a qualified contractor. We're almost finished. For people who have to leave, we've got 3 more slides. If you've done everything else, I strongly urge you to check out a program like NERT in San Francisco, Neighborhood Emergency Response Team, or other communities have their certs. This all started after the Loma Prieta quake in San Francisco. The San Francisco Fire Department decided to train an army of volunteers to help it because it was severely overstretched during that earthquake. So I'm a member of NERT. There are 20,000 or so NERT volunteers who have been trained since that earthquake. And if you go into any room with a lot of people in San Francisco, chances are several people in that are NERT volunteers. And what they'll do is they will teach you in 6 free evening sessions or 2 to 3 day-long sessions. They'll teach you about emergency first aid, very rudimentary emergency first aid, triage, light search and rescue. And in the event of an earthquake or a big disaster, if you, your family, and your neighbors are okay, you self-deploy, you take your gear, and you go to a predetermined location in your district where the fire department will send you out in teams to do the smaller things so that they can concentrate on the bigger things. It will make a huge difference during the next disaster. So we're about at the end. The handout that some of you got has this information on it, but you can also go to my website, earthquake.matthewlspringer.com. You can just Google Matt Springer earthquake and you'll find your way in. It's got a lot of resources. It's got the pictures of precautions that I showed you and a lot of other pictures that I didn't have time to put in. It also talks to my blog. These talk to each other. So I really suggest you check out the Quaketips blog. Again, I get no financial, nothing financial about this. And you can probably tell that I like to talk about this stuff. So I've got my email address right here. I will stick around for questions after this talk, but if later on you have questions about things, feel free to email me, and I'll try to help you. And I want to leave you with one final note. These precautions that we've talked about are a hassle. Yeah, they're annoying. They are inconvenient. But I want you to think about those keys that you have with you right now. You lock your door in the morning, and you take those darn keys with you everywhere you go, in your pockets, your backpacks, your purses. You even run the risk that if you lose them, you'll lock yourself out of your home. Why would you do such an incredibly inconvenient thing every day? Well, you're just doing it because you're worried that someone's going to rob your home. Well, I got news for you. I think that if you live in the Bay Area, the chances that you will experience a Loma Prieta or maybe Napa-style earthquake are larger than the chances that someone's going to rob your home. So I think it's common sense to just make the precautions that you take match the risks that you face. And with that, I'll close. I'll stick around for questions for a few minutes, and thank you very much for your attention. Are there any questions from the audience at this point? Yes? So the question was, does my website have information about securing labs? I don't have a lot of details about securing labs, but I do have on my UCSF website, I do have a page that reminds people that they need to do this sort of thing. Not really, but if you approach a lab in the way you would approach your home, and you say, well, file cabinets, incubators, what kinds of things could fall over and cause a problem, it's pretty much common sense. And then talk to the facilities people and say, well, we want to brace these items. Can you help us? Yeah. No, they have materials. They don't use exactly the same kinds of things that the consumers do, but they'll be able to bring whatever they need, presumably. Other questions? Yes. Okay, this is a good question. She asked if you stay in your bed, if the bed is really the safest place to be, what are you going to do about small children? Well, this is a human nature question. I've seen official instructions that say make sure that your kids' bedrooms are set up safely, you stay in your safe spot, and then you go and get them. But there's a guy I know who sends out his own tips occasionally by email, who mentioned, I think this was a really good thing that he said. He said, stay in your bed, and then he said, parents, you're not going to stay in your bed. He knows, right? And so I guess think things through ahead of time. If you feel that you are just going to have to go and check on your kids, then make sure that there's nothing in the way. Make sure that you're not going to have to wade through sharp, broken objects and things like that.
So where do you go if you're in a room like this?
Yeah, that's a good, so the question is, where do you go in a room like this in a Quaketips? There's really nothing much you could get under except maybe that one table right there. So Gabe would be the winner. And the rest of us, well, what the fire department taught us during NERT training is that if you're in a room and there's an aftershock and there's nothing to get under, they said at least go for a wall where the wall meets the floor, away from windows, away from heavy things that can fall on you, and curl up, make yourself as small as possible, and cover your head. And, it's not perfect, right? But you're at least decreasing the odds. And actually, that touches on a general concept for all of these things, is that none of these things are foolproof, but the goal is to decrease the odds. If you can cut out 99% of the things that could go wrong, you can't do anything about the last 1%, but you're still in pretty good shape. And I actually mentioned in one of my blog articles, that's why when we take plane flights, we fly in reputable carriers. We make sure that if the person next to you starts lighting a shoe on fire, you tackle first and ask questions later. But you typically don't bring a parachute with you, right? There are things that could still screw you up, but there's a limit to what you can actually prepare for. Any other questions? Yeah.
So your list of emergency supplies, I feel like I have most of those things in my house, but they're not in a kit in one place. What's the reasoning for how, I guess it's hard for me to imagine a scenario when I need to evacuate, but I don't have time to gather things, but also I can still access wherever I put my emergency kit.
Right.
How important do you feel like it is to have everything in one central location versus just having all those things?
Yeah, so the question, I'm repeating the questions if people are watching online. The question is essentially where do you put the emergency kit and what should be in it? Is it, if you've got the supplies but they're already in other parts of your home, do you really need to have them in the kit? And I've actually dealt with this on the blog. I hope you go and look at the article entitled, Where Should I Keep the Emergency Kit? But I like to think of this as 3 levels, okay? There's the portable kit, which you probably won't need to use. Most scenarios, if you're impacted by a quake after an earthquake, you're probably living comfortably in your home, but you can't buy food anywhere, okay? So you want to have food and supplies in your kit. The portable kit is if you really have to leave. If they've red tagged your home, you got to get out of there, or if you see clearly there's something wrong. But you're not going to be a fast evacuation. Unless your house is in the process of tumbling, right, you're not going to be evacuating quickly. So if you do evacuate, it's going to be a controlled, methodical evacuation. You could get things that you want. The nice thing about having everything in one place is so that you won't have to find them, and especially for perishables, for food and things like that, you don't want to have to rely on the food you already have in your cabinet, because what happens if you desperately needed to go shopping that day? You were out of almost everything, right? But for tools and things like that, yeah, there are a lot of tools that you're not going to have in a portable kit, and you already have them in your home. So like someone asked me once, why don't I have a crowbar in my emergency kit? Well, I have a crowbar in my home already. I don't see the need to put it in the box. That is my emergency kit. So that's absolutely right. So 3 shells, your portable kit, your extra supplies, and everything else that you already happen to own in your home. Any other questions? Yeah.
I had a question about how much petty cash do you think is reasonable? I mean, you don't know 14 days, 7 days,
Yeah.
$500, more,
It-
grand.
It's a really good question. I used to, and it's funny because inflation, I put my kit together in the 90s or something like that, and I think I had $100 in the kit in the beginning. I think I might have upgraded it to $200. Okay, maybe I shouldn't be saying things like that, but no one knows where my kit is. but the thing is that, I felt that $200 was pretty good, and then last week I was reading something, I forget where they were talking about having your, $1,000 of cash in your emergency kit. $1,000, am I really severely underestimating what I'm going to need? It's really hard to know. I would say that if you can make sure that you're self-sufficient with your supplies, so that the emergency cash is just going to get anything that you happen to realize that you really could have used, that a couple of $100s is probably fine. But I think you just have to decide personally for yourself. Hard to know.
Another question about, perhaps the blog covers this, supplemental food other than those pre-packaged types of emergency, military type products, canned goods or soups or things. As a person that's been stocking your emergency kit, do you have certain primary things like pasta or do you have recommendations on your blog?
Yeah, so the question, I think I forgot to repeat the previous question, which was basically how much emergency cash should you have, the one I already answered. This question is basically what are there preferences for the kinds of foods and supplies that you have in your emergency kit? And one of the things that I like about the MREs is that they've kind of made that decision for you, and so they've put together meals. It's not just one entree, you've got a whole meal in there. And so if you have enough of them, you're basically good to go. But I do supplement them. I have MREs, I have cans, and I cycle through the cans more frequently. Things like canned carrots and canned peaches, stuff like that. We've got some dog food for our dog, right? And we've got some of those fat and calorie bars that I was telling you about. And that's pretty much it, because I do feel that we'll almost certainly have some food in our cabinets, right? Even if we desperately needed to go shopping, we still are going to have some food in the cabinets. And as you'll read about, if you go to the blog, I've decided that since the expired MREs actually are still okay to eat, there's no point in actually getting rid of them. So you can keep them around as sort of like a second layer or something to help hand to neighbors who didn't prepare, right? Things like that. In terms of pasta, things like that, I think the best thing to do is avoid something that's just going to make you really thirsty. So like I used to have cans of salted nuts in my kit, and one day I thought, oh, that's not a good idea. That's just going to create more problems than it causes. One other thing that I'll mention is that in terms of water, you've got your emergency water. You can get the jugs or the envelopes or things like that. And then if you run out of that water, people will either have the water purification tablets, or there are ways to use bleach or boiling, things like that. But I just discovered, and you may know about this already, I just discovered about 2 weeks ago about the personal water filters that have been around for the past decade. Someone emailed me and asked me about them. They're the Life Straw and the Mini Sawyer, things like that. Just learned about them. It's too early for me to officially recommend having them because I haven't personally experienced them yet, but I've ordered a couple. I'm actually very curious. They're getting rave reviews from REI and Time Magazine, and the FDA has approved them and stuff like that. So I'm not going to go out on a limb and say you should have these, but you might want to look these things up, because that way you'll have like an extra little cylinder that if you've used up all your emergency water and you're stuck with questionable water, you can actually apparently drink that questionable water through these filters. Gallons, hundreds of gallons of them. Yes?
You've already mentioned that one should not leave a building necessarily during an earthquake. But what about if there are 3 levels in your home? Which level should you be on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I never know how to answer that question, to tell the truth, because, well, I can, again, it's like where do you put your emergency kit? So the question was, if you're on a 3-level building, which level do you want to be on, if assuming that you're not going out of the building? And I can come up with scenarios where, wherever you were, that it was the wrong place to be. If your building does collapse, and this happened to some of the buildings in the marina, okay? People in lower levels of some of the buildings of the marina would have been better off if they weren't there, okay? There are other buildings in the marina where people were on top levels and they fell to their death, if I understand correctly. So again, it's whatever choice you make, I can come up with a scenario where it was the wrong choice. And here you come back to the odds, because you could look at that and say, well, if being on the top might be fatal, and being on the bottom might be fatal, maybe I should just leave. But the fact is that the odds are much greater that you'll have problems if you run out than if you stay. And so any advice that I can give you of what to do could lead to a bad situation. But the odds are that it won't. And it's like a seatbelt. You know, I like to use this example because I think we all know people that say that they were in an accident and they weren't wearing their seatbelt and they got thrown clear, and if they had been wearing their seatbelt, they would have perished, right? But that doesn't mean that we all stop wearing our seatbelts, because again, it's an odds game. They lucked out, and a lot more people luck out because they do wear their seatbelts. So I'm kind of skirting around actually answering your question, just because there's no real answer to give. But I hope I have explained the thoughts that should be going through your head. Yes.
One thing we didn't talk about was gas stations. So even if for smaller earthquakes, I know a larger one would probably decommission many of the gas stations, but for smaller ones, do you know what size earthquake it would take to make it so that you can't get gas, but you're not stuck in your home? You might want to drive to work still.
Interesting question. I've never actually thought about that. I'm afraid so the question was, gas stations, how large of an earthquake would it take to decommission a gas station so that you might be fine, but you wouldn't have access to gas because the gas stations were closed? And I have no idea. But it's a really interesting question. Maybe I'll look it up for my blog one of these days.
I've been told in California, to keep your gas tank in your car half full all the time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I usually keep mine a quarter full, but it's a similar concept, right? You know, it's not just for earthquakes, it's for any emergencies. If everyone suddenly needed to leave, you don't want to be trying to get gas. You know, interesting, I got an email from someone a couple of weeks ago who lives in a tsunami inundation zone down in LA. And like here, our tsunami inundation zones are just like a few blocks. But down in LA, there are areas where there are big wedges that go in from the ocean. And he was asking about that. And what he said is that in areas like that, if you are in an earthquake big enough to be knocked over, that you should not even wait to hear from the authorities. You better get out of there and get inland. And so I thought about that, and I said, hey, you know, some of these situations completely turn all of this advice on its head. And so a lot of creative, unusual situations out there. And you know, when it comes to gas stations, I just don't know what they would experience. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, I don't cover it in my blog. The question was, what kind of emergency food should you have for toddlers and babies? I don't really have a good answer to that other than to say that having a supply of the food that you would normally give them, yeah, especially if it's non-perishable. For anything that doesn't have an extremely long shelf life, like say it has a half-year shelf life or a year-long shelf life, that's okay. You just make sure to rotate things into the kit on occasion. But I'm not aware of, you know, toddler MREs or anything like that. I don't know if anyone's ever come up with something like that. I would say just have your stash. It's like we don't have special pet food for the emergency, but we do have some cans of our usual dog food and kibble. All right, well, thanks for sticking around, folks.